Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So I'm Carrie Treadwell, and I have the privilege of serving as the Senior Director of Patient Advocacy and Engagement at the American Association for Cancer Research. And it's truly an honor to welcome all of you to this educational session, Optimizing Communication to Facilitate Patients' Involvement in Research. And also my pleasure to introduce our co-moderators today, Dr. Fatima Cardoso and Teri Pollastro. But before I do that, I want to extend my sincere thanks to the Alamo Breast Cancer Foundation for our continued collaboration. It is always a pleasure to work alongside you, and a heartfelt congratulations for all of your program success this year. It's truly been outstanding. So the impact of patient advocates in cancer research has never been greater. And the level of engagement at SABCS has never been stronger. This year, more than 546 patient advocates are registered for SABCS 2025, both in person and virtually, representing over 202 organizations from 21 countries and 41 US states, as well as Hawaii, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico. That is absolutely incredible. And in addition to that, more than 29 patient advocates are contributing as speakers and panelists in the scientific sessions. It's outstanding. This level of engagement does not happen without strong and intentional leadership. And so I want to provide a special thank you to SABCS's leadership for always putting patients first. Special thank you to Dr. Foti, Dr. Kaklamani, Dr. Ortega, and Dr. Lathrop. I'd also like to offer a very special thank you to the patient advocates who served on the SABCS 2025 program committee. I don't know if they're there, but if they're here rather, but if you are, please raise your hand. Special thank you to Carol Bass, Vernal Branch, Julia Mao, and Mary Jimenez. We deeply appreciate your dedication and hard work. Thank you. We accomplish great things when we work together, and this session is a perfect example of that. Like many great ideas, it began in the hallways of a scientific conference. This time it was at the AACR annual meeting, and it was during a conversation that I was having with an SSP advocate mentor, Maida Dior-Sutliff, who's also the executive director of the Metastatic Breast Cancer Alliance. We talked about the importance of ensuring that this session truly reflected the needs of the community, and Maida responded very characteristically that she had ideas and that this was good. And that's always what you want to hear when you talk to Maida, so this has been fantastic. From there, Maida connected with the president of the Advanced Breast Cancer Global Alliance, Dr. Fatima Cardoso, and soon brought in Teri and Abigail, Kirstin, and Dr. Chavez Mac Gregor. And from that collaboration, this session came together, one that I know we are all going to learn a great deal from. So co-moderating today's sessions are Dr. Fatima Cardoso and Teri Pollastro, and I encourage you to read their full bios that's listed in the Alamo webpage on their website. So Dr. Cardoso is the founder and president of the ABC Global Alliance, as well as the founder and chair of the ABC International Consensus Guidelines and Conference. She's a senior consultant in medical oncology, an internationally recognized expert in breast cancer, and board certified in both medical oncology and internal medicine. Teri is deeply engaged in advocacy efforts, both locally and nationally. She serves as an advocate on multiple Department of Defense grants, is one of 4 advocates in the Translational Breast Cancer Consortium, and she sits on the University of Washington Cancer Vaccine Institute's Patient Advisory Board. Teri also serves on the advisory group for the Fred Hutch MET-X program, which supports individuals across all metastatic cancers. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Cardoso and Teri Pollastro.
Thank you, Carrie and panel, for being here. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jonathan Colmier. I'm the executive director for the Alamo Breast Cancer Foundation. Definitely want to welcome everyone here to the symposium. Hope you're having a great time so far. This is our 28th year hosting the Alamo Advocate Program. It's really remarkable what we do, and we thank everyone for their participation. This program was created in partnership with the organizers of SABCS to enhance the educational and relationship building experiences of patient advocates at SABCS. We are very pleased to have all of you here in person and virtually, all those watching virtually right now. This year, we have one of the largest classes of Alamo scholars in our history. We have 36 scholars this year. It's really amazing. Of those scholars, 30 are sponsored internally by Alamo Breast Cancer Foundation's Alamo Advocate Program, 4 are sponsored by Teresa's Research Fund, and 2 are sponsored by MBCA. The scholars come from 16 states, including Puerto Rico, and 8 countries. We also have 7 advocates serving as scholar mentors. This year's Alamo Advocate Program is dedicated to the woman who founded both Alamo Breast Cancer Foundation and the Alamo Advocate Program, Dale Eastman, my mentor, my friend, my superhero. We lost her April 16th of this year, and it is really a real honor for Dale that SABCS is dedicating the entire symposium to Dale this year. Yeah, she meant a tremendous amount to all of us, and it was a serious loss.
We're going to be honoring a very, very dear friend and my mentor. Arlene Draper was one of the original members of MBCC. She was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1976 and again in 1990. Following her second diagnosis, Arlene and her husband were ready to fight not only for her life, but for all women and men facing breast cancer. In 1991, Arlene founded Why Me San Diego, a breast cancer information and support organization, and co-founded the California Breast Cancer Organization's CAPCO, an umbrella organization of 9 groups working together to educate and advocate for the eradication of breast cancer. She was instrumental in the passage of vital state laws for breast cancer education, access, research in California, and she also represented CAPCO on the MBCC Board of Directors. She worked tirelessly for MBCC's mission and goals, serving as an MBCC field coordinator, attending the MBCC conferences, and graduating from Project Lead. Arlene served on many breast cancer panels and research committees at the federal, state, and local levels, including as a reviewer for the Department of Defense Breast Cancer Research Program and the California Breast Cancer Research Program and the National Cancer Institute as a peer review. As she said at one time, unfortunately, I had to have breast cancer to go to the White House and sit on research panels and meet wonderful, heroic women that have been a pillar of support and inspiration. These have been the most empowering years of my life, and they have kept me healthy and energized. I hope to have made a difference. Arlene passed away October 2024. Please join me in a moment of silence for my dear friend Arlene. Thank you.
Okay, and finally, before we get the show started here, I want to thank our Alamo Advocate Program Director, Mary Jimenez. You've been a rock star. We appreciate everything that you've done. And our committee members, all the volunteers that make this program come together. We'd also like to thank our sponsors. At the premier sponsorship level, Genentech, Pfizer, Menarini Stemline, Lilly, Novartis, and Cybermedia Productions. At the collaborating level, Daiichi Sankyo, Merck, AstraZeneca, Natera, and at the contributing level, Exact Sciences. Also, so let's get the show started. Panelists, welcome.
So thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon. So my name is Fatima Cardoso, as they said. I'm the president of the Advanced Breast Cancer Global Alliance. It's my pleasure to be here and to participate. As you know, we're going to discuss 2 topics that are really fundamental from the point of view of patients, but the point of view of healthcare professionals as well, which is optimizing communication, making sure we understand each other, that we are on the same page. Without good communication, we cannot have shared decision making. And also, demystifying what it is to participate in clinical trials, and you will hear a wonderful short talk of my friend Mariana. But there are a lot of myths still regarding participation in clinical trials. Last year, in the session we had with the US MBC Alliance, there was a number that stood in our heads. Only 7% of cancer patients participate in trials in the US. So outside the US, it's even lower, this number, so only 7%. So it's my pleasure to be here. I'll pass on to my co-moderator for a few opening words.
Hi, my name's Teri Pollastro. I'm from Seattle, Washington, and I was diagnosed with early stage breast cancer in 1999, and then 4 years later I became metastatic, and I've been living with MBC for 23 years. So I've been very, very lucky. I think part of that is because I did participate in a vaccine clinical trial. It was a phase 1 trial, and I was the third participant. There were 20 of us in the trial, and 10 of us are still alive today. Okay, shall we start?
Sure, yes. So, should we start with you, Mariana?
Okay, the presentation.
Yes. So,
Do I go to the podium or do I do it from here?
whatever you feel better.
Wow, I will be walking around if you
You're
give
too
me
tall
options.
anyway. So, we haven't introduced you, but I think everybody knows you very well. But Mariana Chavez Mac Gregor, she's a medical oncologist. She's based in MD Anderson, right close by. Close by as in Texas size, which since I lived 1 year in Texas, I learned to redefine big in coming from a small country. So Mariana, thank you for accepting to be here.
Good afternoon, everybody. Is it on or do I'll go from here? Oh, okay. Oh, so actually I can move. No, it's fine. Hello, everybody. My name was Fatima. It's Mariana Chavez Mac Gregor. I'm a breast medical oncologist, and I was given the task today to try to talk to you a little bit about clinical trials and how patients and advocates can be involved and how we actually need to build partnerships together. I think I'm just going to flip. Yes. So this is my presentation. So I don't have any disclosures related to this topic. And what I thought that I will do is to start. Well, I know that you all are well aware about what clinical trials are. Maybe we need to start by discussing what they are and just really say that this is the scientifically rigorous way that we have to answer crucial questions. And we do this across all medicine, and we can ask and answer questions related not only to treatment, but also relating to diagnosis, to safety, to quality of life. And it is really the great tool that we have to push our field forward and to bring ideas to realities in terms of treatment. Now, clinical trials, they follow a lot of rules. They follow strict ethical protocols. They follow oversight by different regulators, and sometimes that is intimidating, and that creates part of this mystery around what clinical trials are. And I have had patients that ask me, like, why the clinical trial is designed this way, or why not? And the reality is that sometimes, or often, or always actually, as a investigator that has this trial open, we may have very little flexibility to modify those very rigorous criteria that the clinical trials have. Now, when we think about clinical trials, we tend to think about therapeutic trials, and those are some of the ones that you're hearing in the general sessions here. But also we have clinical trials for diagnosis, for quality of life, for screening. So we can really do clinical trials along the cancer care spectrum. We can have clinical trials regarding drugs that are better for symptom control. Some of the sessions earlier this morning we were talking about new trials and management of nausea and vomiting, like things that really matter and what we may not be pushing in that regard. New drugs, therapeutically to our patients, we can improve the way that we manage the symptoms of our patients. So clinical trials really cover a very, very broad spectrum of objectives. And of course, as you know, we have clinical trials that are phase 1s, phase 2s, phase 3s, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I think this touches on what Fatima was mentioning, like why clinical trials matter. Well, clinical trials are the way that we advance the care of our patients. These clinical trials are really changing practice or bringing new drugs to the market. And it is true that a very small proportion of patients participate in these trials. And we can talk, hopefully, in the discussion about some of the many reasons why this is. But the reality is that this small proportion makes, one, those patients that participate in the trials so important for all of us to push our field forward, but also it makes all of us and should make all of us wonder how generalizable those results are, right? If we're only enrolling young, very healthy individuals in clinical trials through big academic centers, is that really applicable, or we can generalize the results to normal, more real, just like all of us patients? So I think this is very important for us to talk about issues with generalizability and really emphasize that diversity. It's very important for us. And I'm talking about diversity in terms of age, race and ethnicity, urban versus rural area, et cetera, because that way, if we have patients in clinical trials that reflect the normal population, I think we'll feel strongly that we are able to generalize and extrapolate the results of the trials to all the patients that we care for. So, something that I want to show you, this is the list of the drugs that have been FDA approved for the treatment of patients with metastatic breast cancer. And in red, you can see the ones that have been approved in the last decade. And we have had 18 new drugs approved in the last 10 years. I know that it's not enough, but it's been an incredible development. And all of this happened because of clinical trials and because of the incredible courage and generosity of the patients that participated on that. And these drugs are today available because of that. So I think it's very important to keep that in perspective. So why clinical trials feel mysterious? Well, we're talking about demystifying that. So why they feel mysterious? And I think there's a number of reasons. But just to begin with, we have this very complex vocabulary: randomization, placebo, IRB, protocol. There are things that are part of our lingo that can be very hard to interpret when you're not familiar with these terms. We're going to talk hopefully later today about the very long, dense, terrifying consent forms that sometimes we're handing you that are very hard to read, that are making you feel scared, and with reason. And I think sometimes this first in human, we don't know anything about this drug, can be incredibly terrifying, because also we don't know if the alternative that it's standard of care is going to be better or worse or safer, et cetera, et cetera. And also, we need to acknowledge that there are very real reasons, historical reasons for mistrust. And we have to serve that as a medical professional. What we have done, there are reasons where there were people that were not treated well, that were part of clinical trials, and certain racial and ethnic minority groups were targeted for that. So we need to acknowledge that there are valid reasons to mistrust. There are a lot of misconceptions, this idea of being guinea pig or receiving no treatment, which is something that we don't consider ethical. None of our patients will receive no therapy. So these are some of the reasons that trials feel mysterious, and actually the entire ecosystem of clinical trials, it's very complicated. This is just a representation of all the stakeholders that are involved in clinical trials. Regulators, pharma sponsor, investigators, research teams, data safety monitoring committees. We all have the same goal. The reality is that we may come at it from different perspectives. I may want my patients to do better. A pharma sponsor may have a different goal. So we all play crucial roles, and trials can be different if they're sponsored by industry versus investigator-initiated, whether they are federally sponsored. So this, I think, creates a lot of the complexities and mistrust and challenges understanding clinical trials. Now, where I'm going to focus the next few minutes, it's where patients and advocates fit. So what you all and your friends and your colleagues and patients out there, what they can do and how they fit in the infrastructure of clinical trials. And I think the reality is that they fit anywhere where we can have a partnership. And I believe that it's the right dynamic and relationship where we have, that we have to establish, and we need to partner with our patient and advocates across the clinical trial journey. And what do I mean with that? I mean that you are incredibly important. So our patients, I mean, you inspire us. That's just the truth. And I think also the reality is that you challenge us. And I said that in the positive way, like you push us to be better. We were here yesterday and one of you was asking some questions about management of symptoms. And I probably failed to answer that question right, saying that we just still, don't have the tools and that we were asking you to be patient. And she said, like, you make me cringe, but I said that. She's challenged me, and I feel like I failed, right? Like we have failed our patients often when we cannot do what is important to you. But that, it's powerful for us. So I think it's important that you hear that we care, and that this presence that you have, it's inspiring and challenges to try to do better. I think that it's very important for you to know that bringing your lived experience priorities into scientific research, it's key, because if you tell us what matters, then we can try to push that. I think patients and advocates that help us in the design of clinical trials can really help us debunk assumptions about what is acceptable, what is feasible. Are visits every day, are they okay? Maybe not. Are biopsies entry of clinical trial are okay? Sometimes we think no, and our patients tell us, yes, I will do that. So you help us understand this, and very importantly, also to define meaningful outcomes, and you can help us influence very important aspects regarding dosing, schedule, tolerability. We know that many of you actually in this room have been key on the maximum dose, initiative to try and make us think differently about how we're dosing these drugs. So there are different areas where patients and advocates play a very important role, and I think you can help us develop research questions. Again, sometimes even just by asking those questions that we don't have the answers to, we can design studies to try to answer that question. You can be part of advisory groups at the clinical trial level, grants, et cetera, because your feedback, it's gonna be key. You can help us review protocols and give us information about all of this logistics. Many of our grants now require to have involvement of a patient advocate to go through the process review. Susan G. Komen, BCRF, they're encouraging us to have the voice of our patients since the beginning. And I think it helps us make trials and studies that really matter. Even if you're not part of these reviews, review committees or advisory groups, I think patients can be participants, can be ambassadors, can be trust builders in the community. Your voice matters. And number one, if you participate, I think you should know that you are helping a lot of the field and that we appreciate it, and that generosity can make a difference. But also, you could explain clinical trials to others. You can help expand the voice of the importance of rigorous scientific research. You can help correct those misconceptions. Your personal stories are incredibly, incredibly valuable, and you can help us enroll more diverse patients by sharing that very important message. You're trusted in the community, and you can help us with that. And another way is to be a voice at the legislative level. Stories matter. They matter more sometimes than doctors just talking about graphs and numbers. So you all can help advocate for coverage for clinical trials. You can help us support policies that remove barriers to participation, that encourage, decentralized clinical trials, and really help influence funding priorities, because many times this research is funded by the government. And just as a, example, I was sharing this with the team in one of our planning calls. I treated Dale Eastman in the last years of her life. After she moved from San Antonio to Houston to be closer to her family, I was her physician the last years of her life. And there was this one day that she came with this pink folder. And she was holding this pink folder. And she told me since the beginning, I have a gift for you. And I was like, what is this? I'm not going to tell you until the end of the visit. So she was holding this pink folder. And at the end, she told me, this is for you. Just for you to know what I've been fighting for. And what that envelope had was a copy of the legislation that had just passed in Texas that provided mandatory coverage for individuals treated for cancer for fertility preservation. It was work that was started here with people like you that empower others, that work collectively. So these things can happen. We as doctors didn't do it. You guys can. So this is just an example of the incredibly powerful message that you can help us spread. So just to close, because Fatima said short, and she knows I never do very short. But I think the reality is that, clinical trials and research, they have transformed care. They have, and they're going to continue to do so. And we need to try to demystify clinical trials, but really start with the honest, clear communication that it's bilateral, where we are partners, where we're not subordinates, where we're teammates, and really emphasize that we need all of you to help us and that you fit in all the journey from the inception, what you do to motivate us, to inspire us, to help us to do better, and then to push that at the legislation level to really bring your experiences to every part of research. So with that, I will thank you, and I actually thank you not only for your attention, but for the great work that you do and that I know you'll continue doing. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our two panelists. Kirstin, who is here from London, is that correct?
Well, Cotswolds.
Okay. An avid horseman?
Yes.
And Abigail, who is here from Florida?
Orlando.
Yep. And I know, Abigail, you have had so much experience with clinical trials.
Just enrolled in my 14th.
Would you like to share some things about that?
I absolutely would like to talk about how to find clinical trials, because I really think it's important that we as patients are doing our own research and doing our best to assist our doctors with the information that we're able to find. But the very first thing that every single one of you can do is simply tell your doctor at each visit that you would like to participate in a clinical trial. Don't wait for your doctor to make suggestions. If you're not comfortable talking about specific clinical trials, simply indicate your willingness to participate. And for those of you who are in underrepresented groups, and I mean this like lobular breast cancer, inflammatory breast cancer, people with interesting genetic mutations or novel genetic mutations. But I also mean that in those communities who are not represented because doctors often make assumptions about the person in front of them. We know from the Become survey that the Alliance sponsored that was originally thought about by Marina Kaplan, who I know we all miss, and then Stephanie Walker became the face of that research. That showed us that Black women were unlikely to be offered a clinical trial. And so for those of you who are in those categories where the doctor's not going to automatically think of you, it's more important for you to say, I'm raising my hand. Tell me about clinical trials. Secondly, at least in every portal that I've had, and I have way too many portals, there is a place where you can check a box to say that you are willing to be contacted by a person in that health system who has a clinical trial that you might be eligible for. And so what I did was I sought out thought leaders, people who were researching or were interested in researching something that was unique about me. For instance, I have an ATM germline mutation. And so I found where are the people who are researching ATM, where are they? I became a patient in that health system simply by having a second opinion consult. And then I checked the box in that portal. That's part of how I've been able to participate in so many clinical trials, because I get messages in my portal probably about once a month about interesting different things that people are thinking about. And it's not just cancer stuff. I participated in an audiology trial where they were testing vocal tones to see if they could correlate that to diseases. There are oftentimes researchers who are really creative and thinking about really interesting things. And that is something we can do to participate, right? So, raising your hand, seeking out thought leaders. Third, there are organizations who are contacted. Lobular Breast Cancer Alliance, FORCE, for those of us who have hereditary cancer. Those organizations are contacted by researchers. You sign up at those organizations, you're on their list. They think of you when they have someone or when they have a research project. And I can't end without saying GRASP. GRASP has been a wonderful way for me to connect with so many different doctors and so many different researchers. It's free. Sign up for GRASP, graspcancer.org.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What I also think about patient involvement and why it matters so much is what each of us brings. So every person in this room will bring a different set of data into a trial. And you know, what you bring to science and research and other patients really matters, and you're doing it for other patients as well. That's really important to understand. We cannot get hold of any drugs until they've been through trials. So, you know, brave pants on or not, we need to get out there and we need to get into these trials. And we also bring into the trial a context that data cannot capture. For example, manageable side effects and tolerable side effects might not always marry. So when you are in a trial, it's really important that you take the time to talk about the side effects and how it impacts on your life. Because remember, you're not just talking, you are talking about yourself, but you're also talking for all of us that are going to be following down behind you. And even if the trial turns out not to be as positive as we'd like, that is also incredibly valuable. You are incredibly valuable to the process and to all of us out there. And when we're involved in trial design, communication, and outreach strategies, and I believe then that the research becomes more accessible and it becomes more relevant. And I like to think as well it creates trust, because if we're brought in at the inception of a trial and then you're offered that trial and you look at the data and you think, oh, patients have been involved in the design of this trial, you might feel a little bit more comfortable about going into that trial. And also I'd say, do try and get in there if you have an opportunity, and do try and talk to your communities and spread the word how important it is. Because if your voice and your data is not in that trial, you are not represented. And if we do not have the drugs tested on the communities that they're going to go out for, then we're not going to really know the true efficacy of them. So this is really important, and we must be passionate about getting into clinical trials and really reporting back what is happening to us. And it's very interesting that you've got me and Abigail here, because Abigail has been on 14 trials?
Yes.
And I've never managed to get on one. Don't be disheartened though. I've been involved in trial design, and I don't give up either. I don't give up easily. And I'm still trying, but it's always made me giggle that I'm kind of in the background doing the work, but when it comes to getting on one, they're difficult. In England where I live, and I think I've talked to quite a lot of American advocates, we have some hospitals that are brilliant. They're training hospitals, they're Cambridge, they're London, and they're all singing and dancing, and you get your little diagnosis, and then you go away with a lovely breast cancer nurse, and she goes, we've got this trial, we've got this trial, we've got this trial. But where I am, there are no trials. There's nothing going on at all, really. I'm in the provinces, and I bring trials to my oncologist, and I do say, oh, what about trying for this trial? And he does try and get me on them, but often they say they're enrolling and they're not, and for whatever reason there's always been barriers. But I would also say never give up. I'm not giving up. Never ever give up, because always believe that it's important and you might get there in the end, which I hope will happen.
Thank you. Maybe I'm just going to pick on something that you said. Even when the trial is negative or it does not reach the result that we had hypothesized, it is extremely important that the results are published and presented. And sometimes that is not always done. And so we count on you, and particularly on those that participated in those trials, to say, you know, it was my life there. I want you to present the results, because we learn also with negative experiences. If we know that that particular treatment does not work, we will not, again, waste the resources into that road. And sometimes if we don't publish, someone else around the world will do it again to a new group of patients that was totally unnecessary to do it. So don't think that being in a negative trial was a waste. It is never a waste. We learn, but it's necessary that those results are published as well. And so, and don't give up. You will end up in a trial. And by the way, before I forget, there is a wonderful service in the UK done by a patient organization that is called Make Seconds Count. And you can call, make an appointment with a nurse, and the nurse goes through your case and the available clinical trials in the UK. For the moment, it's only in the UK, and helps you find a trial where eventually you could get into based on the characteristics of your case.
We do have a few databases. MetUp UK, my charity, also has a database of trials.
Yeah.
Finding the trials hasn't been the issue, it's actually getting onto them.
We get you.
Persuading them to take you. So.
Those exclusionary factors can be really complicated, and one thing that I've experienced recently is a secondary cancer. That is a exclusionary factor with many trials, and so I think that patient involvement in the design of clinical trials can help them weed out what are the really important exclusionary factors, right? Because the data needs to be gathered and then presented in a certain way so that it's reliable and so that it is it can be replicated, right? So there are sometimes reasons for exclusionary factors, but patients being involved in that process can absolutely help streamline what's really important.
I wanted to go back for a second and talk about informed consent. I know that most of you have probably heard about it. I think we really need to talk about how difficult it is for patients to read it, how long it is, what a waste of paper it is a lot of times, and no one really reads it anyways. So, you know, I recently was asked to review one, and it was 18 pages long, and I did, and then I answered at the bottom, and you know no one's really going to read this. So I think that that's a big frustration, and I thought, Abigail, maybe you'd like to talk to that?
Well,
yes, she does.
I am that crazy person who sits there and reads every single word of every single informed consent, because informed consents are important legal documents. I want you to say that with me. Informed consents are important legal documents. We have to treat them like that because you are bound to that informed consent after you sign it. Now, I am not saying that signing an informed consent or reading it that you can ever negotiate. I do, many times, but it is really hard because once you get to the point of reading it as a patient, it has gone through so many different steps and it's usually set in stone. So I am not suggesting in any way, and my husband told me I had to say this, I am not suggesting in any way that any of you should take on the burden of trying to fix it. I'll do that, and there are other people who will do that. Don't think that you have to do that, but I think there are 5 things that are really important for every single one of you to know, not just for clinical trials, for everything else. There's 5 things that's really important to know, and before I go to those, I want to tell you a story. So, I showed up at the hospital on May 7th of 2015 in labor. And we had started at home. I was trying for a VBAC. So I had already been laboring for about 24 hours. I showed up and they had an informed consent for me to sign. I'm in labor. I read every word, even though I was in labor. And I got to the bottom of the second page, and it said that I was consenting to them taking pictures of me while I was in labor, pictures of my child, and that they could use that for any purpose, including marketing. And I said, give me a pen, because it was on paper. And I started, nope, not gonna agree to that. And the ladies behind the desk were like, what is going on? What is this crazy person doing, right? And I said, why would you take pictures of me during labor? That is completely unacceptable. I don't want you there. And they had no idea it was in there. Or so they said. So I lined that out. And they allowed me to do that. And then I got a call from the in-house counsel a couple of weeks later. They said, nobody's ever done that before, but you know what? That really shouldn't have been in there. So, as an example of something that maybe that's not a big deal to somebody else, but that was a really big deal to me. I don't want anybody taking pictures of me or my child and using it to make money without paying me. So, anyway. But that's just an example of the things, because I have found that we can take pictures of you during treatment in 7 different informed consents. And so it's not just for the situation that I encountered, it's also in other types of treatment informed consents. That's a big hot button for me. So I'm not saying that you have to look for those things. I'm just saying that what happens is informed consents can also be something that the hospital system is using to try to accomplish other tasks than just you consenting to treatment. So, especially for clinical trials though, 5 things. Know how many appointments and how long each appointment is supposed to last. How are you gonna fit cancer care into your life, rather than your life having to fit into cancer, unless you know how many appointments do you have and how long do you have to be there. Number 2, know what you as an individual will be reimbursed for. Will you be reimbursed for parking? Will you be reimbursed for driving? Will you be reimbursed for food? Very important things. Number 3, know what the sponsor is paying for and know what your insurance is still going to have to cover. Most of the time, blood work, scans, etc., those are still going to be billed to your insurance company, and so you'll still have copays, co-insurance, all the things that are part of your insurance contract. And one thing that I've run into is I get PET scans, but most of the trials I've been in, they use bone scans and CT scans. And so it wasn't apples to apples. And then it was really hard to get the scan that I was used to, the PET scan, because they had already paid for the other things, right? So it's really important to discuss that with your doctor, also with the PI, how they are monitoring your disease. If that's different from what you're already doing, I'm not saying you have to negotiate that. I'm saying just know what to expect. Number 4, know what happens when the sponsor goes for FDA approval. If you are in a trial and they go and it's good, because of course we hope that will happen, and then the drug is going for FDA approval, there's times when you are not allowed to keep taking the medication while the sponsor goes for FDA approval. And that is in the informed consent. Just know what happens. And number 4, if anything says you are waiving a legal right to anything, pay attention. I always recommend that you get the informed consent at least the day before you have to sign it, at least. Because you should have some time to digest it. I am not suggesting that you're going to understand everything that's in it, but get out that highlighter and get out tabs or whatever you want to do to remind yourself that you want to ask about that particular thing if you don't feel like you understand it. And 2 resources I want to give you. Triage Cancer. It is an excellent, excellent organization. They have excellent resources. And if you are metastatic, we have monthly legal clinics at Project Life where we will review any legal contract that you are about to sign. And I realize sometimes that means that you have to wait a month, and maybe you don't want to wait a month before you have something reviewed, but there are resources specifically for metastatic patients that are out there. But Triage Cancer is wonderful also. They have a legal and a financial navigation program that can be extremely helpful, especially when you're about to sign a legal document, because every informed consent is an important legal document.
I'm just going to quickly add there as well, and this goes throughout the trial process. Don't just answer questions. Ask questions as well, and never be silenced. Always ask questions and have the confidence in yourselves to do that.
I know that some of you are scared, though, that if you are the squeaky wheel and you're the person always asking questions, you might get kicked out or they might treat you differently. And because I always ask questions, that I sometimes am treated differently, but I've never been kicked out of a clinical trial. You're not going to get kicked out of a clinical trial because you have questions. And if that could possibly happen, just give me a call, please.
But you're too valuable. You're too valuable.
All right,
But
so
the one thing that I will add to those, extraordinary, pearls of advice is that a lot of the clinical trials at the very end have questions regarding optional samples or optional questionnaires or those things that are in addition to the core of the clinical trial. So make sure that you read it because you might otherwise be signing for extra things. And some of those, for example, are research only. So you might be given tissue and biopsy or more blood work, and you will not know the results of that. So that will be important. And to the point of asking and the things that sometimes you can help us advocate, sometimes the sponsors will not necessarily offer some type of reimbursements. And I have patients that come to see me and it's hard for them to make this, long drives or visits and hotels, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes we've pushed to try to get some of that reimbursed. We don't always succeed, but if we don't ask and if you don't tell us, we're not gonna get it there. So that's also super important.
yes, and one thing I would emphasize on that, a lot of clinical trials have unrealistic demands when we speak about logistics. Mm-hmm. And I'm one of those investigators that ask, why do you ask this blood test at day 8? Or why do you want this blood test? What is the reason behind it? But many of my colleagues, they don't take that detail into the protocol. But it's very important that you also ask and say, how many more times do I have to go to the hospital because I am in a clinical trial? Because you don't want the disease. There was a very interesting article that I saw many years ago that says, does being a patient have to be a full-time job? Right?
Right.
And this is because you have to put your life in the middle of all the appointments. And if you are in a clinical trial, it's most likely that those appointments are the double or even 3 times more than your normal appointments. And what I can tell you from the investigator point of view, and I think Mariana will agree with me, most of those things are not necessary. They are just for protection. But we went through the examples that Mariana said that were build mistrust to an overprotection that made clinical trials too complex, too bothersome for the patients, and then sometimes the patient cannot participate because she or he lives far away. He cannot go to the hospital every week or every other day. So please speak up because it helps us. I know you look at us, we look very powerful, but we're not. And we have to do what is written in the protocol. Right. And we need your help to change that and to say, if you don't need the blood test, don't ask for it, right? Because it's an unnecessary burden. And I'm very conscious, Teri and I are very conscious of time and want to give you also the time to ask some questions. So please go to the microphone, just identify yourself.
Okay.
And ask questions.
When they're coming up,
Yeah.
I was just going to say, we've got progress and innovation, and one of the things I want to reassure you about, which is really exciting, is we've now got programs like iSpy. Now, iSpy has shown that adaptive trial designs can actually match patients to promising therapies faster. And they also present data to adjust randomization. So we're actually really trying to tailor. We're getting to the point where we're able to tailor patients to the respective types of medication. And another good thing about this is we're looking at different types of backfilling, which is how we put patients into the trial. and how we find the optimal biological dose. So we have patients at different levels taking different amounts of the treatment at the same time, because actually drugs will work differently at different levels and for different people. So we are really expanding trials. They are going to become more and more exciting as we develop them. And Abigail actually has been working on a trial herself.
That's very true. And I got to meet somebody at this conference who actually enrolled in a clinical trial where I got to help design it, and I got to help design the actual kit. And let me tell you that a patient being involved at the beginning of the clinical trial design, that can help also the investigators.
I don't think we're going to have time to answer all these questions, but let's start right over there.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kosi Blessing. I am from Nigeria. I am a breast cancer survivor. Very good presentation. I'm coming from a resource-limited setting. In Nigeria, we have less than 5% of people with health insurance. I can tell you that everyone having cancer in Nigeria, most of us pay out of pocket. I paid out of pocket for my treatment. Everything, I paid for everything as a young cancer patient. And so it is for other cancer patients in Nigeria. And less than 1% of people in Africa have been involved in clinical trials. I was prescribed to take Ibrance every month. And in Nigeria, Ibrance costs about $1,000. And I'm supposed to take it every month. I can't afford that, right? And I'm not just talking about me, I'm talking about every other single patient in Nigeria who pay out of pocket and can't afford the basic treatment, right? So I know that you have a lot of, clinical trials going on here and there in the US and advanced countries. Do you have, do you plan to expand it to countries like Nigeria? Because, you mentioned that a lot of people don't take up clinical trials here. I can tell you for free that we are ready to take it up. So if you want to take up, if you want to explore that option of taking it to other countries, we have an open hands to it. So I'll be available to, discuss this further.
So let me take that on, because unfortunately none of us can decide that. Yeah. And the sponsors of the trials are the ones that decide which countries, which centers to go. There is, however, a movement from the last probably 5, 7, 10 years maybe, where trials are going to low middle income countries. And this is because trials are becoming too expensive in the United States and Europe. Now, what I think you can do as a patient is also educate yourself and others so that the trials in those countries follow the same rules and have the same protection for patients as they have in high-income countries. And what we can do, and we do that, we advocate for trials to go into those countries as well. But it is very important that they go with the same quality and not taking advantage of less regulation in those countries. But thank you.
Burnell Branch, 31 years, breast cancer survivor. I was a young woman when I was diagnosed, but I am also working in the older, aging adult population now. And what I see, there's so many exclusions for the elderly. And we need to change that exclusion criteria, because maybe the dosage may be higher, or a higher tolerated dose may be fine in a medium age group, but then look at how we can dose those older patients. So I would like to see maybe more advocacy in that area of these older aging adult patients who are coming down with breast cancer and other cancers.
100% agree. I think we need to push, and as Fatima would say, I think as patients on the table or investigators at the table, we're trying to do that. There's been a movement towards that. For example, for years, there were clinical trials that by default will exclude men with breast cancer. And then we will not have any data to treat our, patients that are males. And now we have to think about why are we excluding them. So rather than having the default list of exclusions, I think we need to be more thoughtful. There's, for example, at the NCI level, we used to exclude everybody that was HIV positive. And now we only exclude patients that are HIV positive if there's drug-drug interactions and if their immune system counts are very low. Right? We need to be more thoughtful, but I totally agree with you. There's a movement for something that we call pragmatic clinical trials. I don't know if you have heard about it. So pragmatic clinical trials are simpler trials, right? Trials without so many blood draws, without so many visits, clinical trials that reflect more the cadence of routine care. And there's a push to do some of those trials. They're cheaper, they're easier. They still provide an answer to a relevant question. Sometimes disconnect comes that sponsors, when they are, again, talking about the stakeholders. People have different interests, right? So sponsors, if they are going to go to approval, the FDA, for example, or another regulatory agent, they want to have all the potential data, right? So the regulators said, what about hemoglobin at day 32, that they have it? But the reality is that those things don't quite matter. So I think investigators and patients are helping us to do more broad eligibility and simpler, because we'll be better for everybody.
Thank you.
Joanne Hayashi, I'm from Breast Cancer Hawaii and also representing the University of Hawaii Cancer Center. I really hear the message many times about, let's spread the word about making sure the patients are asking the clinicians about clinical trials. But I know the list of clinical trials open for breast, we see the list of clinical trials open. And then for metastatic breast cancer, last time I checked, it was 0 in Hawaii. So I'm going to tell somebody to ask, and then they're going to be told there isn't anything that's open for them. So, and we've been trying for a while to try to figure out, kind of where the bottlenecks are, try to advocate for more research to be done in Hawaii. But at the end of the day, the challenges are the challenge. There's all kinds of reasons why, where we are where we are. But what do you have any suggestions for what, from a patient advocate grassroots perspective, we could do to actually have the trials open in sites that maybe don't have a large population catchment? Many of the reasons why the studies aren't open in places. I don't think we can. I don't think we're the only place that's like that. So
Half of the clinical trials that I've participated in have been remote. Half of them.
I see.
There are remote, decentralized clinical trials. The one that I designed is remote. So even though there's not a site actually open, you can still participate. Now, treatment trials can be a little bit different, yes. And so that is something that we should talk about offline.
Okay, thank you so much.
But just, I think, for example,
there's a lot of
NCTN and CORE, but NCTN, so these are federally sponsored through the cooperative group trials. And the University of Hawaii, the Cancer Center director, Naoto Bueno, he's a big researcher.
Yes,
I think he was at MD Anderson, so I think he will be very receptive to hear, the thoughts from the patient advocates in the community there. And I'll be happy to connect you with him.
We're trying to tomorrow, but we just want to make sure we're covering all our, everything we can.
He will need your help. He will need your help to pressure the ones that take the decision, because again, he's not the one taking the decision. He may not even be given the opportunity to open the trial. So he will need your help so that the voice of investigators with the patients is much more powerful than investigators alone. Last question. I'm so sorry for everybody else, but we have to be the last question.
Hi, I'm Sheila Polite, and I'm here from South Jersey Breast Cancer Coalition. And I would just like to echo a lot of what you talked about with the clinical trials. I am an unaffiliated member on an IRB, for Thomas Jefferson Health. And what I'd like to say is the consent form is very, very important when you talk about really reading it. But when it comes up through an IRB, we really go through it with a fine-tooth comb. The legal department looks through it. We look through it. A lot of questions are asked about the consent form. And one of the things that I know people are concerned about is what happens to your information. That's a big question, is people wonder, you're collecting all of this stuff about me. Who's keeping the information? Where does the information go? So that's a question that you can ask. Sometimes it is on the consent form, but if you don't see it, that would be a very good question to ask when you participate in a clinical trial. But know that as an unaffiliated board member, I represent the voice of the patient. So those are the questions, some of the questions that I raised is about consent form, who's participating in the trial. But thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe just, there was a question online about if there are any organizations that help cover expenses for participating in clinical trials. I will ask Mariana to speak about the reality in the US, because for Europe, for example, everything that is truly research, so it's outside your standard of care, should be covered by the trial. And the only thing that may be asked of your own health coverage is what is considered standard of care. So I don't know if in the US it's different.
So in the United States, we need to get insurance approval for patients to participate in clinical trials. And there's been legislation, again, pushed by patients and advocates, that mandates that they get covered. But we have to ask for permission. So in terms of all the other expenses, right, the visits, the travel, the lodging, many of us have local organizations that are very helpful. So for example, in the Houston area, there are actually homes that are designed to host families for their travel. I sign very often forms for my patients in an organization that is called Angel Flights. So people that have small private planes will pick up the patients and fly them. And we, again, we need to know, we can connect you with our social workers that are more familiar with all of those resources. And usually, like, we are the ones that have to sign a lot of those forms, and we're always very happy to do that. But there are and keep your receipts. Some of the insurance companies actually have travel. So you need to read the consent, read the policy, all of that, because it might be in very, very, very fine print.
Okay, I'm so sorry, but we really do have to close now.
I'd like permission to ask, to tell you one thing, besides thanking y'all. I think it's extremely important because most advocates don't know how long it takes and the money involved in going from bench to production. So.
Oh, you mean from developing finding a new treatment?
All the way.
Oh yes, so from finding a new treatment in the preclinical space and then reaching a trial, a phase 3 trial, you may start with something like 1,000 possible new drugs, and you end up in phase 3, maybe with 2 of them, and of those 2, maybe 1 is positive. So that's why research is so expensive. You start with 1,000, but then in the end you may have 1. And so, and there, I don't know, I cannot give you a number, but it's a lot of millions between preclinical and clinical. Research is expensive. And that's why treatments are expensive, unfortunately. And that's why there are so many out-of-pocket expenses in so many countries.
Okay, we'll try this again. Thank you all for coming, and on behalf of all of us, we really appreciate it. And I hope next year, since we really could have gone a little longer, we could do this again, and it would be great to maybe have some young researchers in here that are planning clinical
you're
trials.
Not liking the old ones?
Early career. How about early career?
I don't take offense. I know I'm not young.
That was not meant towards you. Just, you know, the newbies. Thank you all very much. Really?